SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford. I mean, I was quite struck by Mark Harper not really being able to spell out a route to a referendum. What did you make of the interview?
Well, that's quite extraordinary, really, because we were told that this is a partnership of equals. It's a union of equals. And, of course, if you have such a union, you need to have consent. Mark Harper talks about the Prime Minister working with the Scottish Government. Look, we want to work when it's right with the UK Government. We work together on Ukraine, for example. We all stand together. But there has to be a respect for democracy. And when, Mark Harper talks about 2014 and what happened, what he omitted to say was that after that referendum, all parties came together under the Smith Commission. There was agreement about more powers for the Scottish Parliament. Crucially, every party signed up in that document to another referendum if the people of Scotland chose to have one. What happened in 2021 is that we had an election to the Scottish Parliament. Now, we have two votes. There's the constituency MSPs and there's the list votes. Look at the way that Westminster does it. Look at the constituency MSPs. We won the vast majority of the seats to that Parliament, 63 out of 73. There is an independence majority in that Parliament. When a government is in power, it's in power to enact its manifesto. And there's a manifesto commitment from ourselves and our partners in the Greens of delivering an independence referendum in the second half of the Scottish Parliament. It is not a good look for Westminster to say, we don't hear you, we're going to ignore you. You can't continue to ignore democracy. We know that the route for the Scottish Parliament calling its own referendum is not one that's viable after the court action today. And we respect the decision of the Supreme Court. But again, that's Westminster that has legislated through the Scotland Act to stop the Scottish Parliament going down such a route. There has to be a way in that scenario that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government can trigger a referendum. And of course, in the previous referendum, we had the Edinburgh Agreement. That was an agreement of the two governments that that referendum could take place. Westminster can't just hope this goes away. It won't go away.
So what is your next steps then? You say you respect the Supreme Court decision. What are you going to do?
My message to the Prime Minister is recognise the reality of that mandate that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government has. We should have talks that allows the Scottish Government to have a Section 30 authority, that we can have that referendum. Now, if we don't have that, I would regret that position. But that then means what the First Minister said, that the next election that we're going to face is a Westminster one. The only option that we would have, the only realistic option from now, would be to use that general election as a de facto campaign for a Scottish referendum.
Is there a problem, though? Because what you're doing there is you're saying that people are voting in an election as if it's a referendum. But, of course, people vote in elections for all kinds of different things. I mean, look at the living standards issue that people are now facing. Look at the NHS, look at schools, look at energy prices. People can vote for all kinds of different reasons. You can't just say they're definitely just voting on a binary issue, because that's not how it works.
We're, of course, going to have a conference in the early part of next year, and we'll debate all these things and we'll come to a very firm conclusion about how we're going to face this. But we're in a situation that Westminster is not recognising the harsh reality of a government in Edinburgh that has that mandate. So if we have to look at mechanisms such as using an election, and then we would have to appeal to the people of Scotland to recognise that this is a one-off. This is about making sure that Westminster does listen to the voices of the people of Scotland. And, of course, we're setting a high bar because we have to win that election and win it with more than 50% of the vote. Actually, it's interesting, if you look at the 2021 Scottish election, in the list vote, slightly more than 50% of the voters voted for independent supporting parties. So we will take that challenge if we have to. But, of course, when we have that debate, it's about what kind of country. It's about how you respond to that cost of living crisis. It's about how you deliver sustainable economic growth.
You say that it would be a one-off. I mean, that's what we were told last time, wasn't it, with the last independence referendum?
One of the points, if you look at the two agreements, the Edinburgh Agreement and the Smith Commission at the end of it, there was nothing in either of these documents that said that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But let's also remember...
But that's what... you go through the documents, I know you're across all the detail, but for many people, they'll think, look, you've already had a different independence referendum, why do you want another one?
Two things have happened, Sophie, since then. One is that we were told in 2014, if we stayed in the UK, that we'd be staying in the European Union. And
Brexit makes it harder in some ways, doesn't it, for an independent Scotland? You'd be talking about a hard border, potentially, with passport control, with customs checks. We know that people in the EU have said that you're going to have to adopt the euro if you want to become a member of the European Union.
We can go through these things one at a time, but the point is that if you look at polling in Scotland, 72% of people in Scotland want to be back in the European Union. Independence creates an opportunity for us to do that. The opportunities that we have for trade and investment as a consequence of being back in the the European Union. It's about making sure that we can deliver the economy that we know that the people in Scotland need. Look, we have seen a declining population on a relative basis with the United Kingdom for every decade for the last 150 years. We have to change the record. I know through green energy, for example, we can upscale our production fivefold. We can deliver 385,000 jobs in energy as a consequence of doing this. We have a plan for delivering growth, for delivering prosperity, of delivering on our climate targets, and we need the powers of independence to do that. Why, for example, Westminster is holding us back in carbon capture and storage? There are many examples about the things that we would do that would transform the Scottish economy. Now, you talk about trade and so on. Take Ireland as an example. You go back to the post-war period, more than 80% of Ireland's trade was with the UK. It's now 9% because they've grown the overseas markets. And actually, over that period and every year, Ireland's trade with the UK has grown. There is a growth opportunity that we will deliver on, delivering prosperity, driving down on the poverty that we're inheriting from the current regime. It's a message of hope, and we will do this. We will win this argument. I think tonight there's a lot of people in Scotland have a resolve that we will not be silenced and not be stopped by the UK government not recognising democracy.
Is the truth of it that, you know, in some ways it quite suits the SNP to be talking about independence because it means you're not talking about your record in Scotland and what's currently happening in Scotland? I mean, let's look at the NHS, for example. The worst A&E waiting times figures on record, 6,000 vacancies in nursing and midwifery. Minutes of the meeting, of course, of Scotland's NHS leaders in September, saying there's £1 billion hole in the budget, so it's not possible to continue to run the range of programmes the NHS currently offers while remaining safe and doing no harm. This is really frightening stuff.
It's an absolute priority of the Health Secretary and the government to improve the outcomes in NHS Scotland. We know the responsibility that we've got to do that.
So you admit it's not good enough then?
Yes, I admit that that has to be better. Look, I could say to you, if you contrast the performance of NHS Scotland against other parts of the United Kingdom, then we outperform other parts of the United Kingdom. However, we have to do better. I absolutely accept that. But one of the problems of all of this, Sophie, you look at what happened last week with the autumn statement. The funding that we get is largely driven by the consequence of the UK budget. And our budget in real terms has been cut this year. That's the reality. We don't have the borrowing powers. We know that we need to drive investment into our public services. Look at what's going to happen in the UK over the next 4 years, 5 years. £30 billion of cuts to public spending.
It's not just about money, though, is it? Looking at these minutes again, everything is a top priority. What is the real focus? It's a managing issue as well, isn't it?
You know, I can talk about my own health board in NHS Ireland, and I've got some great people there that are leading that organisation, but we've come through the COVID crisis. There's a backlog that we have to contend with, and we should applaud those that are working really hard in our NHS.
The other thing, of course, is that they are discussing the possibility of a two-tier health system.
Let's just rule that out completely. That will not happen.
Where the wealthy would pay for treatment.
That will certainly not happen in Scotland, whether that's in the current status or in an independent Scotland. NHS care will be free at the point of use for everyone.
I'm interested to know your thoughts on the new UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Can you do business with him easier than Liz Truss?
You know, we've had a really difficult period with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. We had no relationship with the devolved administration, with us as opposition parties. I'm looking forward to having a normal relationship where we can work together. I mean, for example, I've been asking him for more support for the tidal industry, for example, so we can ramp that up. Of course, I will want to do things, whether it's in all our interest to do so, work together over Ukraine, stand up against Putin. But he has to recognise democracy.
Now, just finally, World Cup fever. Unfortunately, of course, Scotland didn't qualify. Who are you going to be supporting in the World Cup?
I'm looking forward to seeing all the games, and I think importantly, I wish Wales and England all the best, and that people here can celebrate the competition and really enjoy seeing their teams playing. And I grieve the fact that my country on this occasion is sadly once again not there.
Talk about celebrating. Did you celebrate a little bit when Iran put one past England?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Of course not. I wouldn't dream of doing such a thing.
Thank you very much for being on the programme. Good to see you.
Thank you.